This program is part of a business forum series produced by KPCC in person and sponsored by UC Riverside School of Business.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming out this morning. Great to see such a good turnout. I want to introduce our distinguished guest today. He is Vincent Stanley, who is co-author of The Responsible Company, which we have on sale in the lobby, and he will be signing books after the event. And he's been with Patagonia on and off since its beginning in 1973, for many of those years in key executive roles as head of sales or marketing. More informally, he is Patagonia's longtime chief storyteller. He currently serves as the company's director of Patagonia philosophy and is also a visiting fellow at the Yale School of Management. And he's also a poet whose work has appeared in Best American Poetry. Please join me in welcoming Vincent Stanley to the stage. And also a reminder that you can connect with us on Twitter at KPCC in person. I'm at the Ben Bergman, and of course at Patagonia. And we are using the hashtag lead responsibly. So feel free to tweet along with us today. So Vincent, thank you so much for coming down to Los Angeles today.
Thanks for having me, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks everybody for turning out so early in the day.
Well, I want to begin with the question that everyone wants to know, and that is, how does one become the chief philosopher at Patagonia? What a dream job, if there ever was one.
Actually, I have kind of a long answer to that. There was a time in the late 1980s when Patagonia was growing very rapidly. And I think that we were all young when we started out. We were all in our 20s when we started Patagonia, except for Yvon Chouinard, who was in his early 30s. And we were fabulously successful, and then I think we didn't know what we wanted to be when we grew up. The company we were adding lines very rapidly. We were adding 75 employees in a particular month. And at a certain point, I think the Chouinards looked around them and said, are we developing the kind of company where we actually want to come to work in the morning? And Yvon started to take 30 of us at a time, often buses, to places like Yosemite or to the Marin Headlands. A few lucky people actually got to go to the real Patagonia. And we started to hash out how we believe we should do business, and we called them philosophies. We did it in a lot of detail. There were 8 different philosophies for general management, HR, production, distribution, marketing, etc. And I wrote a lot of them and taught some of the classes. And I always thought that when I come to the time when I no longer want to be a manager, I would love to teach philosophy courses. So that's what I've been doing for the past 2.5 years, is going out and talking to every Patagonia employee around the world in groups of 12, talking about company history and values in small groups so that we can make it an exchange and not just a Dharma transmission. And then for the rest of the time, I also work with business students at several schools, mostly Yale and also UC Haas, and then work with B corporations.
We're going to sort of alternate between Patagonia and also what's in the book, which is a lot of lessons for business people, which we have a lot here today. So I'm curious, you touched on the group dynamics, the fact that you talk to groups of 12, that
Right.
You would take 60 in the bus. That's something you talk about in the book, how you've found that it's a lot more effective to break employees up into groups.
Yes, I think when you, it's interesting. I once learned from an anthropologist that hunting groups were done in groups of 12 to 15. And then if you made it much smaller, you didn't have enough people, and if you made it much larger, you didn't have enough, you had too many to pursue a kind of concerted goal. And I took this to heart, and I've always done that with if I'm in a meeting that has an outcome or where I really want to hear from people, I tend to keep it in that seminar style group. When we were talking about when I talk with employees, I also want to find out from them how those values are actually playing out in their work life. I don't want to just talk to them. I want to say, okay, the company believes X, and how does that actually make your work, your job, easier or harder? What helps you get through the day, and what serves as a challenge?
And it's quite a challenge to maintain the company's philosophy as a company that's now worldwide, has grown substantially, has stores all over the world, versus when you started out in the early 70s. How do you find that you are able to do that now that you are so big?
The interesting thing is, I think it's actually easier. I hesitate to say that, but I think it's easier actually to maintain the culture now than it was 20 years ago. One of the things, we very early on adopted this sense of responsibility for everything that is done in our name in the supply chain. And that was very new for business at the time we started to do it. And it's very difficult when you're dealing with a factory that you don't own, and you go in and you negotiate with them to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. So when we started to do this, everybody who actually came to work for Patagonia, nobody had this kind of experience. There were no sustainability programs or in MBA, in management schools before 2002 or 3 or 4 or 7. And so basically we would acculturate people by going on a bike ride with them or climbing with them or working with them, and people would either figure out how to do their work at Patagonia or they would move on. But now there are so many other companies doing certain things. There's so many programs, people come out of schools, and so many of our employees are actually attracted to the company because of its values, because those have been well publicized for the last 10 years. That we don't have, the tension has changed. It's interesting. If I go back 15 years, I would say, when I was on the marketing side, you had the tree huggers over in the environmental grants department, and you had the accountants who were trying to sit on the money and keep it from being frittered away. And you had the sales guys who were out there in the world trying to beat everybody up and sell Patagonia. And you had tensions among all those three that created a culture in the company. But now what I see is less of this kind of intercompany battling, and I see it more as almost an internal tension. So that if I'm a product manager at Patagonia, I've got certain sales goals to meet, I've got certain margin goals to meet, but I also have environmental goals. I also have social goals, things that I have, practices that I have to improve over time, and I've got to make the whole thing work. That's a big change. And I think that actually really helps make the culture thrive, because it reduces the amount of politics, it creates more of a sense of we're all in this together.
So how were you able to do that, to create less inner battling in the company and make everyone be on the same page versus where they were, you said, 15 years ago?
I don't know. I don't know how that happened, to be honest. I think part of it is an accumulation of experience at doing this over time. I said in the book that people learn from their failures, but we gain confidence from our successes. And so the more successes, the more we've been able to reduce the harm we do, and at the same time create innovations out of that actually help the business. the more we feel that the more confidence we have to do the next thing the next time around. The other thing that may be different is I think that the Chenards, the owners of the company, have always had strong values. They've always been risk takers. They own the company specifically to give money to environmental causes and also to create an example for other businesses, to do things other businesses might not feel comfortable doing, but to do it ourselves and prove that it can be successful. So that's why they own the company. The middle of the company has always been a very strong culture. We've always had a lot of people who are with the company for anywhere between 10 and 20 years who share the values of the owners. But I think over the last 10 years, we've had more consistent, the top management of the company has been more comfortable with those values. I think before we sometimes had a tension between the very top management of the company that was trying to protect it institutionally, as people saw they needed to do that. And now we have people who are more confident, and we have a CEO who's very comfortable leading a company that is a leader.
So when you're bringing in people to the company now, especially at the higher level, what do you look for when you're hiring people? How do you make sure that they are a good fit?
It's easier now because, again, the pool of applicants is huge, and it's also, there are a lot of people applying who have the skills, have the experience, and also share the company values. We also look for a certain kind of humility. It really helps to have people who are not ego-driven, people who admit their mistakes, people who work with other people without creating a very large facade that interferes with their relationships with people. So we look for those qualities. And the hiring process is endless. I mean, it's easier to get confirmed to the Supreme Court than it is to get a packing job at Patagonia.
Tell us about that. How does it work? How does the process work to get hired there?
Well, people just go through a lot of, whole series of interviews. They're interviewed by people who will be their peers, by people who will be their subordinates, by people who will be their bosses. They come out for a couple of visits if they make it that far.
What is your advice to people here about the best way to interview people and to think about hiring? What have you found works?
You know, I don't have any tips. I don't work in HR. I think it's very hard in the interview process to figure, because people are defensive and they want to put their best foot forward. I don't think there are any good tricks. I think you need to get as strong a sense of that person as you can. But we make mistakes hiring folks. But we do look for a combination of experience, competence, shared values, and also this quality of humility.
Well, because there's been a whole school of thought also recently that interviewing is fairly useless as a proxy
Yes.
for actually how well someone does in a job, because it's essentially whether you like them or not. Well, so...
Excuse that, and that I think all throughout Patagonia's history, we often hired. You can say it's nepotism, but we all often hired friends and friends of friends, and that always actually worked out because we did know the people. It wasn't just an awkward, formal interview situation.
But did you risk becoming too insular or
Yes.
not diversifying?
Yeah, we did. And one of the problems that creates is that as a company grows, the people that you hired, if they've always worked for a company your size, don't understand the systems that it takes to manage a larger company. So Patagonia, like any other growing company, has had that tension when you start to change your systems to adapt to growth. You often have to bring in people who understand that. And then the integration of the new people into the culture with the old people is often a challenge, particularly if you do it quickly, Because the old people are all scared, do I still belong here? And the new people are scared because they say, am I going to screw this up? So it's a delicate process.
So the main premise of the book seems to be, to me, that as you say in it, doing good creates better business.
Yeah.
Not just that you should do good because it's the nice thing to do.
Right. Yeah.
Why do you think that it actually creates a better business?
I can run down a list. Primarily, I think that when you're engaging in activities that are actually going to reduce environmental harm and actually improve community or improve social life, that you engage people more fully. You engage people more fully in your common effort of providing a product or a service. You also keep people from going to sleep. There's a kind of fallacy in American business that in pursuing efficiency, because you can make a system 99% efficient that is no longer appropriate, or it's a system that fails in some ways. And if you are actually looking constantly at your social and environmental practices, you are self-disrupting. You are forced to examine what you're doing and to say, okay, how can we do this so that we no longer generate these chemicals? Or how can we do this so that the people who are sewing the garments get paid a fair wage? And in that process, you question everything, and you often reduce costs, and you often create innovations. We've created products that we didn't know we knew how to do.
Like what?
Ulex wetsuits, neoprene wetsuits. When we went, the whole transition that we made in the mid-1990s to organic cotton, we just thought we were going to organic cotton. What we found out was that before we did that, we didn't really know how to make a shirt. This process forced us to understand the supply chain from the cotton field to the spinner to the knitter and the weaver, the dyer, that we hadn't done before because we'd always handed off.
But does doing good necessarily work for every company? I mean, your founder has said that it just can't really be done for a public company. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there are two parts to that question. The first is if you're making landmines, or the whole purpose of the business is questionable. This premise of doing good creates good business doesn't quite work. The other question about public companies, actually, Yvon and I disagree a little bit on that. Not wildly, but he's very suspicious that public companies so bound to the rule of providing return to shareholders as this primary sole goal of the company, that interferes with doing good. But at the same time, and I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, we helped create something called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which we actually helped create with Walmart in 2011, which is now a group of 140 different companies who make over a third of all the clothing and footwear sold in the world. And that group is engaged in three things. One is to reduce their environmental impacts in factories. So they've taken audits in tens of thousands of, well, that may be an exaggeration, thousands of factories, baseline measurements to try and improve environmental performance year after year, identified practices that are environmentally friendlier, and put those in computer systems so designers can use them. And then the third is the eventual hope is to create a consumer-facing index so you can take your cell phone, put it up against a pair of jeans, and get an environmental and social rating for that. most of these are public companies. You've got the Gap, you've got Nike, you've got Levi's, Adidas, etc. And they're all working together in a place that's what we call pre-competitive. And so far, all of the work has been more of a race to the top than a race to the bottom. So my sense is that that private companies have so much more freedom than public companies. And my sense is that if we can prove that something can be done that does good and reduces harm and doesn't hurt the business or helps the business, that public companies can then move along. There's also a challenge now to the whole notion that shareholder value is the sole aim of the company is actually good for a public company. Paul Pullman is doing great work at, do you want me to repeat it? Is doing great work at Unilever, challenging some of those assumptions.
Mm. But you see now, and as a former marketing person, you see so much greenwashing.
Yeah.
A lot more than there used to of companies pretending like they're Patagonia. Almost, that must drive you crazy.
No.
No, why not?
Because it's always been there. And I do think that one thing that protects us as a company telling stories is that we've done a lot over a long period of time on a number of fronts. And the story is real. You can poke your finger at it at lots of different places and find out and get an ouch back or get a yes, this is true. It's not a concoction. And I also think that the greenwashing is transparent to most people.
You think most people can tell it's fake?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I do think that it becomes part of the general earwash that people hear and ignore more than they say, oh, that's not true. Mm-hmm. I think it takes a lot right now for people to respond to a story in any kind of active way because as a marketing person, what I often see companies do is they want to adopt the story or they want to adopt the position. They want to look like the competitor that's 20% larger than they are. And it's almost always ineffective because you start to use language, you start to use images that are so common that they wash over people and they don't pay attention.
So it has to be genuine?
I would advise when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, I do advise that. And I think it should be genuine for a couple of reasons, and not just effective marketing. I think it creates an internal discipline that if you tell your real story and then also act on the better angels of your nature and do your best to be a responsible company, I think that creates, as you grow or as the business develops, that also creates an understanding among your customers, your employees, your suppliers about what you're about, and it reduces the kind of chatter or friction. Mm.
You've always had this contradiction as a company that depends on people wanting your products and wanting to buy stuff. And I think a lot of us, when we see your very effective catalogs and ads, it makes us feel like we want to go out and buy that jacket.
Yeah.
And you actually did an advertising campaign in 2011 that was famous because it said, "Don't buy this jacket." And it talked about all of the chemicals that go into it, and it was persuading people, don't buy what you don't need.
Yeah.
But of course, if people didn't buy your products, you would go out of business. So how do you wrestle with that?
I think first of all, I'd mention that was not a campaign. We took a single ad out in the New York Times on Black Friday in 2011, and that created "Don't buy this jacket." And as you mentioned, what the copy essentially pointed out, we took one of our most environmentally beneficial products and said, listen, this product lasts 10 years. You can recycle it into something of equal value at the end of its use. Send it back to us. We'll melt it down and make a new jacket out of it. It is 40% recycled, et cetera, et cetera. We pointed out that the amount of scrap it generated, the amount of greenhouse gases it generated, the amount of water its manufacturing used. And the idea was to say, listen, we don't know how to make anything without costing the planet more than we can pay back. And that's just true of everything we do. Every time we get in a car, fly on a plane, use a product. So be judicious. Don't buy what you don't need. Don't treat shopping as a kind of therapy. And as to the argument about putting ourselves out of business, for 40 years we've been making very high quality clothing that does last a long time and that also often costs more than other clothing. And a lot of people would make the argument in the early years, why don't you make your clothing cheaper? You'll get more customers and they'll need to replace it more often. And the argument is no, if you're making quality goods, the business model is to have fewer transactions but deeper loyalty over a longer period of time. So we see this don't buy this jacket idea and now our worn-wear campaign as an extension of that original idea of quality. It also actually opens up the worn-wear idea where we did a 20 campus tour this year. We have a truck that looks like a food truck, except that has sewing machines in it. We would give seconds garments to college students on the grounds that they had to repair what was wrong with it before we gave it to them, and we showed them how to repair it. And the idea is to create a different relationship with the things that you have, so that it's not just when it's shiny and new, and they're beautiful when they're new, but it's what have you experienced in that particular jacket that makes you want to keep that jacket, keep it in good repair. Or if you no longer use it, make sure that it goes to someone else and goes out in circulation because it cost. There was a social and an environmental cost in its manufacturing.
Well, and I have to say I did take it. My first job in high school, I worked at REI when I was 16 so that I could pro deal Patagonia gear and make it a little more affordable. And that was about 20 years ago, and I still use all of that gear.
All right,
I feel no need to replace it.
And part of the great thing about the worn-wear now is in promoting this idea is that it does make it affordable without reducing the quality to younger people who can, we're encouraging people to buy used.
But a lot of your products are quite expensive. I was looking yesterday on the website. You have jackets that retail for $500. So, how do you, so this is clearly something that is for people with means, and you're leaving a lot of people out of it, whereas someone can walk into H&M and buy a jacket for $50. Is it possible to do sustainable, responsible company, but have cheaper prices?
No. I don't think so. I think if you build quality into it, it's going to cost more. Clothing, I mean, I've just been reading and writing about this. Basically, we had a change in the social contract about 40 years ago, and social contract used to be that we paid people well and had job security and pensions in exchange for loyalty, and things were expensive. And then about 40 years ago, it shifted. No, we're going to have very little security, have a lot of fluidity in the labor market, but things are going to be cheap. And for the most part, consumer products are cheaper than they were 40 years ago. Clothing is a lot cheaper if you deduct inflation. And the problem with that is what you do in the course of making things cheaper, both environmentally and socially. So if we're making things responsibly and making things that last, it costs more. But again, if it lasts longer, then you can sell it a second time and shift the relationship that people have to their goods.
What is your number one advice to business leaders, and I know we have a lot in our audience today, about how they can make their companies more sustainable? What are the first steps they should take?
I think the first step is to put into the dustbin the assumption that being socially and environmentally responsible is going to be a subtraction from your business, from the financial success of your business. I don't have anything to prove it, but this is sort of 44 years of experience now. I can look time and again at things that we have done that resulted in reduced environmental harm or some kind of social innovation that cost us margin or cost us sales for a couple of years. And then after that, we recovered or we created a kind of business that we didn't have before. So that in effect, those became investments. There are parallels. If you look at the construction industry, which adopted LEED standards for commercial buildings, LEED standards are pretty common. And the argument of LEED was, if you spend more, it'll take you longer to get the payback, but the payback will be greater. So I think people, as business people, we need to change that very short-term idea of return, look at a longer return, and look at the full impact of our actions, remembering that what we do to reduce environmental harm or to improve our communities actually really motivates people. It really engages ourselves. It makes customers a lot more loyal. It makes employees bring their full selves to work. It enhances reputation. There are all kinds of benefits to that, and it can often result in product innovation. So the first thing I think is to get rid of the mindset that this is somehow, good business and doing good are really separate things.
But I just imagine the number one pushback is going to be, we'd like to do that, but we just can't afford it. You, for instance, are well known for having the daycare on site. And I know people would love to do that, but they say we just can't afford to do that in our business.
Yeah. It's interesting. When we started Daycare in 1983, I was sales manager at the time, and I was violently opposed to this crazy notion.
Why were you opposed to it?
I thought it was too expensive.
There you go.
We were a tiny company. Nobody was doing daycare. And Melinda Chenard was insistent. And it was a very simple thing. Everybody was they were bringing their kids to work, parking them next to sewing machines and next to desks. And the one kid had horrible colic and disrupted the entire office. So Melinda said, we better create some daycare. So we did that, and I think that's the best thing we've ever done. And it really changes the whole tenor of the company. It's really, when you have kids playing in the yard next to where you're working, it's really hard to be officious or vice presidential. It also has meant an incredible amount of loyalty from working parents to have their kids close by. It's also a very high quality program. So we did a study of the subsidy that we give, and it's about $1 million. We charge company employees to participate. But we did the study, we looked at the tax gains, we used some of the methodology from some of the consulting houses to look at increased employee engagement, to look at reduced employee turnover, and we came out with that the program costs us somewhere between a savings of $15,000 or a cost of $30,000. We're not sure. But again, it requires some longer term thinking and some more creative thinking to look at these. But to just say, oh, we can't afford it. It's just like in your life, you know, you can say, well, I can't afford that. Well, maybe you can if you stop spending somewhere else, or you change the way you borrow, or the way you save. Values have much more of a role in business than people admit. And it's really on the values that motivate people and make them want to come to work.
What if you are someone in a company who is not an executive and you want to change it from within? How do you do that?
It depends. It depends on whether the environment is friendly or hostile. And my advice to people who are particularly committed is to get out of a company where it's hostile. But if the company is kind of neutral, Daniel Goleman, we put this in the book, had some excellent advice. I think basically you find a couple of projects that are no-brainers, where you save the company money. To give a large-scale example, Walmart does a lot environmentally, but they will only do things that save them money. They will not do anything that costs them or that looks like a longer-term gain. But there's a lot they can do when they're concentrating on that. So if you're in a place you can prove that a few things will save the company money, you can gain allies, and eventually those allies gain more allies, and what happens is that the people who feel marginalized at the very beginning of the process, because they're the tree huggers, at the end, it's the people who are the naysayers who become marginalized when everybody else adopts the practices. But that takes time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to open it up to questions in the remaining time we have left. So if you want to ask Vincent something, please keep it concise and no statements, please, just questions. But go ahead and raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, over here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. Hi. Hi. I just wanted to ask you, since you talked about speaking to entrepreneurs, the whole idea of saving money, I think in the times that we live in, particularly for entrepreneurs, is really big and top of mind. For a larger company to shift money from, you know, one area to another or think of future gains is really different than I think it is for people starting out with next to nothing. Can you talk about that and how you advise in that realm?
You know, one of the, I'm wearing a shirt that was made by a couple of students at Yale who decided to make organic cotton dress shirts. So they're operating, you know, their initial inventory was stored in their house. I've worked a lot with people who are just getting started, and one of the pieces of advice I give is adopt these practices from the beginning. Because I would advise everybody who's an entrepreneur in the room there's a Patagonia and Yale did a guide. It's a guide for entrepreneurs to becoming a B Corp, a certified B Corp or a benefit corporation, and whether or not and when to become a B Corp. Just as a parenthetical advice. But I advise people to do what they intend to do from the very beginning. It's almost like savings. You know, if you start to put $40 a month into a savings account, you forget that you're doing that, and the benefits accrue. But if you start out and you say you build a business, and then year 3 you say, okay, now I want to become a benefit corporation. I want to give a certain amount to causes. I want to reduce my environmental impact here. And then you talk to your investors and your employees, and they say, why are you changing the game on us? And this is going to be, involves a radical change in what we're going to do. So I think it's best to start those practices from the very beginning so that everybody's with you. I don't know if that helps, yeah.
Shed Ventures and Patagonia's venture capital efforts?
Yeah. We started Ventures, we started 3 years ago, and we set aside $20 million to invest in like-minded companies in 5 different areas involved in waste or alternative energy, renewable energy, water, agriculture, regenerative organic agriculture, and also things that serve the clothing industry, like reduced chemical use. And that has grown now to $75 million. We've made 15 different investments, and we don't have people sitting at a Bloomberg terminal trying to figure out the big data on where to put the money. We look very closely at individual companies and talk with them. We make almost the same kinds of judgments we would about hiring. Or we're looking at people: do they have the experience? Do they have the idea? Do they have enough money from other people? Where if we put in 20% of the value, that it can pan out. And so far, it's been very good, and it's an expanding program. And it's great for us, I think, because it really reduces our blinders. We're learning. We were a clothing company exclusively for 40 years, and now we're really learning about other kinds of businesses.
For those who have sales and margin responsibility, when they come up with a product line that really connects with the customers, there's some celebration that takes place. Mm-hmm. How do you balance that versus the concerns for larger footprint, larger handprint requirements that success requires?
We try to have both. I mean, we're happy when we sell black hole bags, and we're happy when we sell torrent shell jackets. But we also, as part of that process, we're trying to make continual improvements. And there are tensions along the way, big tensions. And the best solutions happen when you actually get rid of the tension, when you come up with a solution that dissolves the challenge between margin and sales and environmental and social responsibility. There's something we've done recently. We started, on the social side, we started 3 years ago with 9 yoga styles and had them fair trade certified, their labor. And what that means is that the workers in the factory are actually, we pay into escrow a certain percentage of the manufacturing cost, and the workers vote as to how they're going to take that pay, whether as a bonus or to buy bicycles so they can get home faster, or to create a clinic. All 3 things have been done. And that grew from 9 styles to a third of the line. So it's about 400 styles for spring 18. And that's an example, I think, of something that surprised us, that we had so many factories who wanted to come into that program. It's actually improved agency, it's improved the lives of the people who are working on the floor. It has been a marketing boon, particularly for our surf line. So again, these things are not always in conflict. And if they are in conflict, you can resolve a lot of it.
I'm curious, we have a startup social enterprise on the path to B Corp certification as well. And we talk a lot with potential investors about the rise of the conscious consumer. Do you think that there's really been this kind of sea change shift in consumers? Is this really changing, or is this just something that people talk about today?
I think there is a shift. I think there are 2 kinds of shifts. First, there's a generational shift. And I think among younger people, they're very concerned about where they put their money. And second, I think there are a lot of people who are more conscious consumers. And I think it started with food, people looking at what am I putting into my mouth? what is its nutritional value, what are the chemicals involved, and that has expanded to other things.
Hi, you mentioned regenerative organic agriculture, and I
Yeah.
know that Patagonia Provisions is something that's growing. I was hoping you might be able to tell us a little bit about how you feel that that fits into the major philosophies
Yeah.
of Patagonia itself.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that. Patagonia Provisions is a very small food company that we started. Yvon Chouinard has always been interested in food. I think the interesting thing about what that allows us to do, when we started Patagonia Provisions about 3 years ago, we hired someone who came from the food world and had made organic fruit, or she hadn't made organic fruit bars, but she had made fruit bars. So in a kind of conventional way, we said, okay, what are we going to make for Patagonia Provisions? Let's make fruit bars. She knows how to do that, and they sell well. But as the business started to develop, and as we started to look at some of the problems in agriculture, it shifted the way we approach products. There's a guy named Wes Jackson who's now 80 years old, has run something called the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas for 50 years, his life goal is to restore the health of the Great Plains. 40 years ago, he developed Kernza, which is this perennial wheatgrass that has roots that grow 17 feet into the ground, and that actually restores soil to health. It restores microorganisms that when you restore the soil to health, you reduce the need for water, for chemical inputs, and you also sequester carbon. So Wes did this. He's never been able to get it to be grown commercially. And so we sat around, and what we did is okay, let's make a beer. So we negotiated with a brewery in Portland and with Whole Foods, and we sell something called Long Root Ale in 108 Whole Foods stores. And for the first time, Kernza is actually being grown commercially. So this is an example. This is not just reducing, our mission statement, build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. This is better than cause no harm. This is actually regenerating. This is actually doing positive good. And I think this is a good direction for our company, and I think it's a good direction for business to look at what are specific social and environmental problems that you can use your imagination to solve in creating a product that's, beer is fun.
And how big do you anticipate your food business becoming?
Well, we don't know, but we could certainly see it being the size of the clothing company eventually.
Yeah, based off of that, I was going to say, how do you feel you're going to be able to transition your market as a apparel company and transition into a food industry based upon the perception that you have currently in the market and how that can develop? How do you see that shaping out?
Obviously, the food business is different, but I think our approach should be roughly the same approach we took to clothing. We tend to, when we're doing the job right, we tend to grow organically, and by that I mean that we don't invest a lot in advertising. We don't try to create a story that's false. The best way to create sales is by word of mouth. And so our business might grow more slowly than another business would, but we'll use those same methods within the food industry. Right now, we don't even sell in stores. I mean, the beer is an exception. We sell Patagonia Provisions through direct, through our stores and through and online.
Hi. Outside of your own company sales and production, do you have any metrics of measuring the effectiveness of the Black Friday ad or the Buy Warren campaign on a larger scale?
We have a lot of yes. And we're getting more serious about metrics as a way to One of the things about being a B Corp that's very handy is we have a very holistic assessment of our practices every 2 years to see where we've gone back or where we've improved. When we did the Don't Buy This Jacket ad, which I co-wrote that with Rick Ridgway, and people said, well, what's your metric for this? I said, metric? Okay. Don't buy this jacket. I said, okay, here's our metric. In 3 weeks, if this jacket has increased in sales, we've failed because we're greenwashing. And in 3 weeks, if this jacket has declined in sales, we're failing because we're being martyrs. So if the sales are exactly the same, that's my metric for success. And that was true. So.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do we disrupt unethical leadership if the free market inherently kind of bolsters those type of companies, whether it's predatory wage practices or just non-green infrastructure and kind of those type of things?
I think it's a process that happens over time. I think one thing that the advantage of social media and all that over the past 10 years is that you can ruin a reputation overnight, and companies are really aware of this. So attention to reputational risk helps. But companies also look at other things. They look at what kind of employees will they be able to get. How will their children treat them at the dinner table? Will their customers walk away because of their reputation? Will their suppliers start to shun them? So I think you have to look at a kind of long-range changes in society for that.
I apologize if this question is a little maybe not on topic, but it's something that I've thought about in terms of philosophy of a company, maybe in terms of a case study. But I was wondering if you could comment on maybe the decline of American Apparel, and because they had very ethical foundations for the company and what they were trying to do in terms of social responsibility, but yet they failed. So I don't know, maybe you could provide some comment on maybe your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, there are two things. One is that I don't know if people know this, but 97% of all clothing sold in the United States is imported. And the only clothing that's still made in the United States is either very low end or simple to make, or very high end fashion. Another example would be there are some companies, some very small companies coming up that are doing very interesting things, but they're direct only. So I don't know whether American Apparel's, I won't comment on whether their practices were, they did make in the United States. I think their failure had more to do with the publicity and the labor practices of the owner. But I don't know intimately about that. Patagonia, when we got started, we used to make about half of our goods in the U.S. and half abroad. And with the trade agreements that were made in the 1990s, pretty much all of the textile industry went offshore. So now most of our production, except for T-shirts, fairly simple things, tends to be from abroad.
And this is such a hot topic right now, so I have to ask, I mean, what would it take for you to manufacture your clothes in the U.S.?
People ask me that, and I think that that's sewing garments has always been the lowest paid industrial work. It was the first industrial job in the 1840s in New England, making clothes. And the labor chase has moved around to go cheaper and cheaper. And as you've started it with fast fashion and with making clothing cheaper, it moved to China, then it moved to inland China, then it moved to Bangladesh, now it's moving to Africa. I think that it will eventually come back to the United States, or it will come back to being closer to where it's produced. But when that happens, it will probably be made more by machines than by human beings. that's also the tendency. One of the reasons you still have so much human labor in a garment is because it's so hard to, the shape is so complex, and it's hard to get a machine to do that. But right now there aren't enough sewers in the United States who have the kinds of skills that could actually sew our more complicated climbing jackets.
So for you, it's more of a skill issue than a cost issue.
Oh yeah, yeah. But my friends who make this shirt wanted to make it in the U.S. and they made it in a factory in New England, and the factory has just failed because it was no longer a business model that could really work, and they were paying a lot of money to get the product done.
All right, time for about one more question or two.
Hi.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you define sustainability or a sustainable business to someone who that concept might be kind of new to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the B Corp's mission is business as a force for good, and if you think that's like an adequate, quick one-liner definition.
I think that is good. What we say in the book, we identified kind of 5 critical areas of responsibility, and 4 of them are really traditional, and it's what business looked at until Milton Friedman era in the early 1970s. The first is your responsibility to run a healthy business financially so that you pay your bills. The second is to your employees and their welfare. And the third is responsibility to the customers and to producing for them. The fourth is to communities. We also consider communities not just where we do business and have stores, but also where our suppliers are. And we added a 5th, which is a responsibility to nature, because without that, that's something that business hadn't thought about. But what we do see the environmental crisis is real. It's bigger than climate change. It includes the loss of fresh water. It includes the acidification of the oceans. It includes the desertification of the soil. It includes the proliferation of thousands of chemicals that have never been tested. And we see this as kind of a major condition of our lifetimes that will become more apparent, and that more business and NGOs and governments will have to deal with. So I think those 5, that's simple enough to have five things that you have to worry about. But business, I think the B Corp as a slogan is good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming out. Also want to thank Vincent and our sponsor, the UC Riverside School of Business, as well as Charlotte and KPCC's in-person team. Vincent is going to stick around and sign books, so buy the books, don't buy the jackets. Don't do that. But thank you so much for coming, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.